Good afternoon. It is a rather somber day for me in that it is the first time that I've been in the city since March 18th. As someone who was born and raised in this city, born in one of the toughest neighborhoods in this city, a community that was, fair to say, had been on the margins, who had seen all of the inequities that we are talking about this week. Driving into the city with a piece of hope in my heart when I saw the skyline and my heart broke when I saw the boards on our windows. This is a tough day. I start first as Kim Foxx, child of Chicago, that when we talk about the week that we have had in the city, from a law enforcement standpoint, what we saw last night and the night before, not just here, but across the country, was angering. But I want to back us up to what precipitated this. You've heard the mayor and the governor, who have been doing yeoman's work dealing with COVID-19, and now this, talk about the horrific death of George Floyd. And I want to not have us limit ourselves to what this week has been about and what it has felt like, not just for those who took to the streets last night, but to those who occupy offices that you work in, your students, your friends, me. When I looked at that video, and I made the mistake of looking at the whole thing, and I watched that man with his knee in that man's neck, hand in pocket, and the casual disregard for his life in broad daylight while being filmed without a concern in the world as to what would happen to him. That we would be inclined to think that it's just the murder of George Floyd that has our streets filled. What I remember feeling in that moment was the casualness of all of the things that we have experienced in this country, that we were dealing with COVID-19. The casual acceptance of racial disparities in healthcare. That when we looked at the work that is being done in the last few months to deal with this pandemic, and the news came out that African Americans were disproportionately dying and Latinos, the casual acceptance that that's part of what happens with underlying health conditions, because the casual acceptance that we have people living in communities that don't have access to health care, and we just accept it. The casual acceptance that those who were losing their jobs in the midst of this pandemic, our frontline workers, our essential workers, were Black and Latino, and going into grocery stores and being clerks and being the least paid, we casually accept that. We casually accept with a hand in our pocket that the last time there were major riots in the city of Chicago in the 60s on the west side, where we have seen burnt out buildings that remain and economic disinvestment continue, that those folks we know had been the victims of historic discrimination and redlining that brought Martin Luther King to our neighborhoods in the 60s before I was born, and we still see the same levels of discrimination today, with a hand in our pocket, looking into the camera as though nothing's gonna change. I say that because I was not okay this week when I saw George Floyd on that ground. Because it wasn't just about the names that were enumerated earlier today, that when we talk about Rekia Boyd or Laquan McDonald or those names here in the city, it is bigger than that. And it requires me to say that even in the response of what we've seen in the last couple of days, for context, for those who don't understand what's happening, it is bigger than that. To watch a man casually take the life of another under the color of law as a law enforcement professional and as a Black woman and a child of Cabrini, My heart broke. What we have seen in this country are broken hearts and anger at the continual cycle that we have seen of the casual acceptance of systemic racism in this country. People are angry. I am angry. What is not acceptable is what I saw last night. That there will be those who will try to exploit the anger and the mourning, and as the mayor has said, the righteous indignation of what has been happening in this country, exploited for their own good. Whether it is those that have come here to sow discontent, who would have the audacity to write Black Lives Matter on buildings when they don't at all feel that, who would use this as an opportunity to sow that discontent, to distract from what the real issues are, to use criminality to poison the conversations around what we ought to be talking about. That the last 24 hours, we've been talking about buildings and not policy. That the last 24 hours, we've been talking about structures and not structural racism. That for the last 24 hours, we have watched our neighbors have to shovel up glass and rebuild after already having to endure closures due to the pandemic. I want us to be clear. We are working with our partners in the Chicago Police Department who have demonstrated extraordinary restraint. I've watched the national coverage. I've seen other cities. And I remind us that this is a test, that restraint is what is required. And we've met that test here. And that we will hold accountable those who are seeking to exploit this moment. That those people who took to that street yesterday and exercised their First Amendment right, mothers with children, elders who were there, who stood toe to toe, but did it without crossing the bounds. That's what this is about. And I don't want us to forget that for a moment. I don't want our Twitter fingers to only tweet about the images that there are some who only want us to see, because we will continue in this perpetual cycle. We will continue this thing that we do, the sensationalism of what this is. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is awful. This is our home. And these people who've come in to try to disrupt that, the organized elements who care not about systemic issues, but shoes for profit. It's not what this is about. When we look back at this time, years from now, I have 4 teenage daughters who are frightened out of their mind. And I tell them what this is about because they say, well, I thought it was about this man who died. If we continue to talk about the fringe element who's tried to hijack this, and not about the men and women who've died in the systems that have allowed for their deaths to go unpunished, we have learned nothing from this. The State's Attorney's Office will continue to work with our law enforcement partners in the city of Chicago and throughout Cook County to again hold those accountable, not protesters. And I want to be clear. We conflate protesters and looters. Those are 2 different groups. Let us not conflate what is happening in our streets across the country with the bad acts of a few. And I know we know that language because we've heard about bad acts of a few versus systems. Use the same rhetoric when talking about those who are taken to our streets right now, and not conflate them with those who seek to do harm. I'm grateful to be back in the city today and to stand with these strong leaders who have guided our city and our state during some of the most difficult times of our lifetime. and are now helping us forge a path forward to reckon with the underlying issues that have us here today. I am grateful that this is a press conference to talk about the efforts to triage where we are, but I know with these leaders here today, because they've already done it, whether addressing the issues of poverty and the casual acceptance that we've had about life expectancies being 10 years apart for a 1 mile or 3 mile radius, they've already started that work. But that's what this is about. And I would be remiss if we only talked about law enforcement and not what this is about. And so we're here, we're ready. For those of you who are seeking to not work in righteous indignation and anger and push the conversation forward, but to do damage and to cause harm, you will be held accountable. For those of you who are taking to the streets in the name of me, my husband, my children, my grandmother, and those who have come before me, I thank you.